Okay, we've got a long one today. Well, a long title, short video, Gospel Authorship, the Synoptic Problem, the Farrer Hypothesis, and the Book of Acts. So I've got a theory here. I've been watching a lot about these gospel authorship, synoptic problems, and it just frustrates me. And that's what kind of brings me to make some of these videos. But I felt like I was supposed to make this one. So what is some background information here? The synoptic problem, you can actually call it the synoptic puzzle because it sounds a little more fun when you call it a puzzle rather than a problem. It doesn't have to be a problem. It's basically a discussion on the relationship between the synoptic gospels, which was written first, did they know about each other, etc. I'm not going to get too deep into that. And the Farrer hypothesis, this one's a little more specific. It holds to Markan priority, meaning that the gospel according to Mark was written first, and then Matthew followed Mark, and then after that, Luke followed both Mark and Matthew to write their gospels. And that brings up an authorship question. Who really wrote the gospels? You can go with a traditional view, but I've come up with a different conclusion. And I've talked about that on previous videos. An internal investigation of the Bible results in many people, myself included, it results in a theory that the traditional gospel authorship attribution or identification is lacking in evidence. So some people come up with different ideas about who wrote the Gospels. And when I'm having these discussions and watching these videos on the synoptic problem, the Farrer hypothesis, I just wish people would pay more attention to the authorship question. I think that would help answer the question. That's kind of the point of the video today. As the last bullet I have here, the goal and main point of this video is to demonstrate that proper gospel authorship identification can result in the solution to the synoptic puzzle or the synoptic problem, and it also confirms the Farrer hypothesis. So let's get into it. Here's a little diagram here. The first gospel written according to the Farrer hypothesis was Mark, then Matthew, then Luke. But again, as we were talking about earlier, I have a different theory here. It was not Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. However, it was Peter, Paul, Silas, and Lazarus. I'm not going to discuss how I got there on this video, but I am going to put links if you're interested, if you haven't heard any of these theories. All the internal evidence, in my opinion, points to these things. Paul is a little more difficult replacing Matthew, but I think you can get there. Peter, Silas, Lazarus, hands down, I'm thoroughly convinced all these guys wrote the Gospels. And I'm going to leave Lazarus out of the discussion because he's what some would say non-synoptic, even though there's recent books put out, he can be synoptic. But just for the discussion today, we're going to leave Lazarus out and possibly make another video on him later. But again, just the three synoptics today. So this diagram here, I've updated the books to show what I believe are the proper authors. We've got Peter, Paul, and Silas. So Peter writes his gospel. Paul writes after Peter, using Peter as his source document and making some modifications. And then Silas comes on the scene and he's writing his gospel, knowing about the gospel according to Peter and the gospel according to Paul. So I've changed the diagram here. Now we're going horizontal because I want to show this timeline with the book of Acts here. So I've got updated authorship credits and showing that relation. And I believe everything, all our questions can be answered internally from the book of Acts. So what happens in the book of Acts? Who's on the scene first, and just in the Gospels in general? Peter is the first disciple chosen when we read all the Gospels. And same thing, the first half of the book of Acts is all about Peter, and the second half is all about Paul after he comes on the scene. And who wrote that? Silas wrote it. So there you have your three gospel authors all there. And interestingly enough, these guys all meet up at the same time in the book of Acts at the Jerusalem Council. I have a theory that maybe that's when they decided to write gospels, or at least Peter and Paul, and then Silas later on in his prologue to his gospel. He says there are many others who have written gospels. So maybe later on he said, you know what? I've got Peter's gospel. I've got Paul's gospel. I spent time with both of these guys. I'm going to write my own version of the story. So again, all internal evidence. The traditional gospel authorship, I think, just throws us for a loop here. So again, back to my theory and main point, proper synoptic gospel authorship identification via consideration of the internal evidence of the Bible story. That means Peter, Paul, and Silas wrote the synoptics. This results in a solution to the synoptic puzzle, and it confirms the Farrer hypothesis. Interesting to notice something here. Who are the three writers? You've got Peter, Paul, and Silas. It's no coincidence that Peter not only wrote a gospel, but you have First and Second Peter. Paul writes the gospel, and then we have many letters from Paul, and then you have Silas, who wrote his gospel and the book of Acts. He probably penned Hebrews. Whether or not Paul was alive with him at the time is a little confusing at the end of Hebrews, but again, these are the guys we want to listen to. It'd be strange if the gospel writers who were guys who wrote nothing else. It makes perfect sense. Everything fits in the biblical story, and especially since Acts is kind of like the backbone of the whole history of the church. You've got Silas, the last one writing, and he's kind of summing it all up for us, giving us hints. So that's all I've got today. I don't know if that's going to generate some questions or not. Maybe I'll do another video on this, including Lazarus, the fourth gospel, which may not have been the fourth in sequence, but it is another one. But he's an eyewitness, just like Peter was, whereas Paul and Silas came later. So Lazarus could have been written early. He definitely knew Peter as a person. So anyway, that's all I've got today. And as always, until next time, contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints, and God bless.